Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome once again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, government, politics, education, business, anything that gets our attention. Actually, we're going to talk about all of those things this week.
Really?
I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass at CompassKnox.com, and I'm joined, as always, by Scott Barker, co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing today, Scott?
Well, I have a hangover from covering the legislature yesterday.
But, there is such a thing as a civic hangover.
I need plenty of aspirin
and maybe some stronger things too.
Oh, phew.
So yes, we're recording this on Friday. The yesterday that Scott's referring to was Thursday of this week, and in just a minute we're going to talk about everything that happened on Thursday, or at least a lot of things that happened on Thursday. I don't know that we have time to talk about everything. I should also mention that for those of you who are listening to us on Sunday, it is Easter. Happy Easter to those who observe it, whether that observance takes the form of a church service, chocolate eggs, a big bag of jelly beans, or all of the above. Hope you're having a good day. And what do we have to talk about this week? Our friends at the Entrepreneur Center had a little celebration. We'll hit on that. A little bit of troubling news out of Hardin Valley Academy out in West Knox County. Some interesting developments in the pedestrian bridge that has been discussed from the UT campus across the Tennessee River. A, frankly, somewhat surprising vote on the school board on their first charter school application in 9 years. So we're going to talk about all of those, but really the first thing we have to talk about is the thing that I think a lot of the country is talking about right now, certainly has been for the last 24 hours, and that is the saga of the Tennessee Three. So, Scott, let's set the stage here. Who are the Tennessee Three?
Well, the Tennessee Three are they're Democratic House members, the State House. Gloria Johnson of Knoxville, Justin Jones, and Justin Pearson. Jones is from Nashville. Pearson is from Memphis. The last week ago, Thursday the 30th.
All of this has happened in the last 8 days. It's kind of amazing.
But, in the aftermath of the Covenant School shooting in Nashville, where 3 9-year-olds, 3 adults were murdered, and then the shooter was killed as well. There was a lot of protest and agitation for the tightening up Tennessee's gun laws. And Tennessee's gun laws are generally considered pretty lax, and during the session last Thursday, or the 30th, Johnson, Jones, and Pearson went uninvited and unrecognized to the well of the House, which is where you go to speak.
It's kind of the big podium in the center of the floor there.
I don't know why they really call it a well, because it is just a podium. Anyway, so they went there, and this was, everybody acknowledges a violation of the
Right. You
House
are not
rules.
supposed to go to the well until you're recognized by the speaker or whoever's chairing the session
Right.
to present your bill or whatever it is.
So they went down there, and Jones and Pearson especially, they had a bullhorn megaphone and a sign, which is, you're not supposed to have political signs on the House floor, and they were started to lead the people in the gallery, the protesters in the gallery, in chants. And the Cameron Sexton, who's the speaker, called them out of order and then closed the session while they were still up there.
Put them into recess, essentially.
Right. Yes. And Johnson was there. This ends up becoming important. She basically stood by while Pearson and Jones did the most active stuff.
Right. They were kind of actually leading chants with people up in the galleries, and
the most that she she didn't use the megaphone. She didn't. In fact, when everybody was chanting, she wasn't even yelling. She was just kind of a little conversational voice thing. But anyway, the leadership, Sexton and others in the Republican supermajority, were none too pleased. And so they decided that they would expel.
Right. Well, and so this was interesting because in the moment, like when they were in the well and then they went into recess, and of course, one thing that came up in the expulsion hearing, which did just happen yesterday, but was that they were only in the well while they were in session for under a minute because, like you said, Cameron Sexton very quickly kind of gavelled out of session. And so then once they were in recess, they were no longer really violating, or at least they weren't violating all of the rules. They may have been violating some. I'm not sure about the megaphone and so forth. But they weren't in session anymore, so they weren't interrupting a session. So it was really only about a minute there where they were in session. Sexton gavelled them out. And then and then they stood in that well for about 5 minutes or so, kind of, as you say, with the bullhorn. And then some other members of the Democratic Party kind of came and got them, kind of moved them, like, hey, come on, let's go somewhere else and talk. But then the legislature, the House stayed out of session for about 45 minutes. And the reports on that day were that the Republican leadership immediately was so furious at this that they were talking about expelling them like on the spot. Like there was this discussion. And then, so the initial reports that came out were that, well, they thought about expelling them. And then there was kind of this narrative that somewhat cooler heads had prevailed and they had decided not to. And so for that day, they just went back into session and completed the business, and somewhat left the impression that, and I talked to Gloria a couple of days after that happened last weekend, and at that point, she said she expected there to be some sanction. I think they all kind of thought that something would happen. They were
maybe censored or
they were staging a protest. It was, you could say, a form of civil disobedience for an elected official, kind of taking control of that platform. But the other point that Gloria Johnson made, and that all of them made in kind of defending themselves during the expulsion hearing, was that yes, they wanted to recognize the anti-gun protesters who were there and to make them feel that somebody in the legislature was listening because, the supermajority was not giving them any attention. But more to the point, they wanted to speak. They are elected representatives, or, at the moment, Jones and Pearson are no longer elected representatives, which we'll get to. But, they were elected representatives. They're sent there by the people who they represent. And they have complained for a long time now. This is something that Gloria Johnson has been talking about for several years, especially under Speaker Cameron Sexton, that the Democratic superminority, like 25 Democrats in the whole House out of 99, not only, of course, tends to lose uncontested votes, but they are often just not even allowed to speak. Their microphones are cut off. They're gavelled down.
They're not recognized.
They can, Gloria Johnson, who's very tall, as anybody who knows her knows, and there's these iconic pictures of her from the last several years standing on the floor of the House with her hand raised. And when she has her hand raised, she's reaching up like to 8 feet or so, because she's over 6 feet tall, and not being recognized. And so their point was that, yes, this was about the anti-gun protest and wanting to make the protesters feel recognized and heard, but also it was about sort of the democratic process itself, the process of legislative governance, that even if they know they're going to lose on a lot of votes, they should be allowed to talk. They should be able to say what they have to say, to ask questions and those kinds of things. And so that was a big part of this as well. But so after this happened, I think, like I said, they did all expect that there would be some repercussions, including the possibility of expulsion. But I think there was still some sense, like over that weekend after it happened, people would come back the next week, maybe be a little bit calmed down and figure out, maybe they would strip their committee assignments, which they did do.
They did do that, yes.
And at least for the rest of the session, impose various limits or sanctions on them. There's a lot of, there's formal reprimands, There are various ways that the legislature has to police the behavior of its own members. But that's not what happened.
No. The Republicans in the House filed resolutions, one each for the Tennessee Three, to expel them, which is the ultimate sanction. One Democrat in the hearing yesterday referred to it as the nuclear option. It's they're and it is exactly what it says. You're thrown out, and
it's used exceedingly rarely.
Very rare. It's only happened 3 times in Tennessee history. It happened in 1866 when several lawmakers were refusing to recognize the citizenship of former slaves from the Civil War. We had one case of bribery, and another one of sexual misconduct. Those 3 are the only times in history that this has happened. And
so criminal offenses, serial personal misconduct, and then refusing to recognize the citizenship of freed slaves. Those are the things that people had gotten expelled for up until this week.
Right, and that's one of the things that was kind of shocking, especially to the Democrats who were subject to it, is this does not rise to that level. This is not criminal activity. This was,
it was a violation of House rules.
It was a violation of House rules, yes, in rules of decorum, not criminal law or anything like that.
Not even ethics.
Not
an ethics violation, right?
Yeah. So, but anyway, they filed those resolutions, and on Thursday, there was a 6-hour hearing. 5 or 6 hours.
I think it was longer than that.
Well,
right, because the floor session went on for about 5 hours before they even got to it. Right? Then about another 6 hours after.
Yeah, and so they took them. They took up the cases one by one, and first up was Jones. He is a young. I think he's 27, African American representative from Nashville. He's got he's a freshman. He's got his background is social justice advocacy.
He's an activist. And he came into the legislature already very well known to the legislature, which I think is a bit of an important part of the backstory, and I think probably already deeply disliked by the Republican supermajority, because for a good long time he led protests within the state capitol against the presence of the bust of Nathan Bedford Forrest, founder of the Ku Klux Klan, Confederate general, former slave, Confederate general known for his brutality, and former slave trader. And Jones was among a persistent group of people of all races, but especially, a lot of black activists who spent a long time protesting against that. And at one point, things got heated, and Jones kind of famously apparently threw a cup of tea that landed in an elevator that the then speaker, I think it was the speaker, was in, and he ended up being charged criminally for that. So he came into the House kind of already as this known and probably not super popular entity as far as the House Republicans went. Well,
during the course of his couple hours of grilling there, he was he responded and had to answer questions, and he made quite a few points. He was one person who watched the proceedings, who didn't really have a dog in the fight, said that he gave a master class in racism, and he called out quite a few of the Republicans that he believed had done things that we considered racist. So when it came down to the vote, his vote was I can't remember the exact numbers now, but it was more to be ousted, you have to get a 2/3 majority of the vote to do that. He had a little bit more than that, 74, I believe.
He had over 70. I want to say it was about 72, but it was a late night last night. I don't have his numbers committed to. I guess I could look at our story to see.
Yeah. But anyway, so he was tossed out in there. Then they took up Gloria Johnson's case, and it was really interesting. Like we said, one of the things is all three of these resolutions use the exact same language, and they all talked about the megaphone and pounding the podium and all that. And one of the key things is that Gloria Johnson did not do any of that stuff. She did, as we said, she went down there, but she didn't.
Even though the resolution said she did.
The resolution accused her of doing that. She had a former lawmaker, John Mark Wendell, and another former lawmaker, Mike Stewart, representing her. They were both lawyers, and
both former Democratic.
Yeah.
But guys who were in the legislature for a long time, who I think were well known and familiar to a lot of people there.
Wendell's from Livingston. Stewart's from Nashville. So the Wendell in particular was a very passionate advocate, telling them that this resolution was full of lies, and he made no bones about it. And it was a real he was really tough on them, just turning the attack on the prosecutors, as it were. Then Johnson had to answer questions, and and she was grilled by Gino Bolso. Most people around here don't.
My social media feed yesterday was full of people saying, "Who the heck is Gino Bolso?"
He's from Williamson County, and I believe he's a freshman as well. And he kind of took the lead on questioning her, and he kept questioning her about those things, and she kept saying, "No, I did not do that. No,
He had one little gotcha, or what he thought was going to be a gotcha, clearly about the megaphone, kind of where the megaphone came from, because there had been these photos of Johnson earlier in the day with a megaphone, and he, I think, assumed that, that was the same megaphone, and that he was going to, got you, you're the one who brought the megaphone, But
no, apparently megaphones are like mushrooms after a rain in the Capitol. She knew someone, a friend of hers, had the megaphone because they were going to be outside protesting.
Right.
And then they decided to go inside, and Johnson uses a scooter to get around in, and offered to store it in her scooter. Then later ended up being in her office, but it was not the same megaphone
right.
as the one that
I
they
saw
used.
somebody on Twitter said that Bolso had made the classic lawyer's error of asking a question that you don't actually know the answer to.
Yeah, and so that went, that dragged out for a while, and then they had the vote on her expulsion, and lo and behold, like we said that you have to have 2/3 of the vote. That's 66 votes to be expelled. There were only 65 Republicans voted to expel. One vote
Right.
difference. There were actually 7 Republicans who voted no.
Right.
So if any of those had voted yes, Johnson would have been expelled as well. And it took the people in the gallery a minute to figure out that she wasn't expelled.
Right.
And of course they started because these are all mostly protesters in the gallery.
Right. Again, just as the week before, hundreds at least, maybe more than 1,000, I don't know, but hundreds of protesters, both in support of the Tennessee Three, as they came to be called on social media, and also still calling for gun regulations. But they were around the Capitol, they were inside the Capitol, they were in the gallery, and even on the floor of the, watching the stream of the video from the floor of the House, you could hear the noise from outside. Oh, yeah. It was really loud.
Yeah. And that was one of the things that was kind of odd is. It was kind of background noise, but you could hear the protesters chanting and yelling and everything else. But
clearly the people inside the house could hear that
all
the time.
Yes, a couple of times they mentioned the noise from the outside. Johnson, so she was not expelled.
So one interesting thing about that, those 7 Republicans who did not vote to expel her, none of them are from Knox County.
That's true.
All of her Knox County Republican colleagues, which is Elaine Davis, Michelle Carringer, Dave Wright, Jason Zachary, and Justin Lafferty, all of them voted to expel her. She's part of their delegation.
Yeah.
All of them, many of them represent districts immediately adjacent to hers.
Yeah.
They all voted to kick her out.
Yeah. One thing that failed to mention earlier, one of the first things that the Republicans who were pushing the prosecution of the 3 did was over the objections of the Democrats, is they showed a video of the initial protest on the 30th when Johnson, Jones, and Pearson went to the well, and they showed a video, obviously taken by someone with a phone
on the floor, because obviously there was somebody standing right in front of them
on the floor, and it apparently was Lafferty.
Well, and the thing is, you can see Lafferty in photos from that day. There were pictures taken from behind the well looking out, and he's standing right in front of them holding up his phone. Like, he's right there.
Well, the thing about that is taking video on the House floor is a violation of House rules. There was no...
Well, and they tried... Right, so that was an interesting part of it, because... Democrats started asking, first of all, they protested against this video being shown because they hadn't been told about it. They're like, where is it from? Yeah. How do we vet it? And they were told, it's just video from that day. But it turned out that wasn't even true. It was mostly footage from that day. But then there were clips, very carefully selected and edited clips from a press conference the next day put in. Like, clearly it had been assembled to try to make a point. But the footage from the House floor itself, Democrats were asking, well, who filmed this? And so, first of all, the Republicans wouldn't say. It was like, even though kind of eventually one of the Democrats, Bo Mitchell, came out and said, we all know it was Justin Lafferty. You know, we all, like, you guys might not want to say it, but we all know it. But so then the Democrats raised this issue of, well, that would be a violation. And the response from the Republicans was, well, that was while it was in recess, so it wasn't a violation. So then the Democrats said, well, if you're showing us footage from when we were in recess, that is also not a violation. So what value is this footage at all?
What are we doing here?
either somebody took video while they were in session and got footage of them actually breaking the rules while they were in session, in which case the person taking the video would also have been breaking House rules, or that video was not while they were in session and so like didn't really have anything to do with the charges being brought against them at all.
Yeah, so that was one of those kind of side subplots to this whole
and
thing.
Lafferty played another sort of small role in this week, which we'll talk about
we'll get to that
in a few minutes.
We'll get to that. There's a lot to unpack here.
But to move through this, Gloria Johnson was not expelled. Then they moved on to Justin Pearson, and they run through basically the same routine with him and eventually expel him. There were a fewer votes to expel him than there were for Jones, but there were more than 66. And so he got expelled. And so what happened at the end of the day? You know, the question coming in was kind of like, are they really going to do this? Are they really going to expel these three legislators? I'm not sure that anybody was banking on there being a difference between how they would treat the three. It was kind of they had all kind of done it together, as you say. Their specific behaviors were a bit different, but you know they were all there. They were all charged together. The charging documents were identical, as you say, and so I think people kind of assumed that either they're going to kick them all out, or they're going to stop short of that and treat it as like a let this be a lesson to you kind of thing. What they ended up doing, of course, and here's where things got, I think, really interesting, because first of all, one thing we have to mention is this is national news.
Oh, yes.
And one point that Wendell, or maybe it was Stewart, I don't remember, made during their arguments for Gloria Johnson was that these kinds of expulsions are not just unusual in Tennessee, they're unusual in legislatures across the country. And so they cited examples from the last couple of decades of people who have been expelled from other state legislatures. And almost every single one of them were, again, like they were criminal felonies, they were egregious, sexual misconduct, these kinds of things. And so this was not just unusual in Tennessee, it was unusual nationwide. It made, when the resolutions were filed earlier in the week, it made national news. Tennessee immediately got elevated, even though this was a very busy week news-wise. We had Donald Trump, facing charges in New York. We had state legislators getting arrested during abortion protest in Florida. We had an election in Wisconsin. So there was a lot going on. And yet, even in the midst of all that, the Tennessee legislature, just because of this, raised itself and the state up into the national spotlight. The expulsion hearings were shown live on national cable TV. I had friends around the country writing me about it. Who's this Justin Jones guy? What's going on in Tennessee? So tremendous amount of focus and attention. Political reporters from all over the country flew into Nashville. Everybody was covering it. Everybody was suddenly paying attention to Tennessee and to the Tennessee state legislature. And first of all, I'm not sure that's something that the Tennessee state legislature is that accustomed to. Because apart from, those of us who kind of try to cover it journalistically, and of course the people who follow it for their own various personal, professional, or political reasons, the Tennessee legislature operates according to its own rules. It has a supermajority. As we were saying earlier, they kind of do whatever they want. They're used to being able to just limit and shut down any dissenting speech they don't like, and they do that as a matter of course. And of course, they've also kind of gerrymandered themselves into a position where they have, even though, probably say 38, 39, 40% of the state votes Democratic, only 25% of our state reps are Democratic. So they've gerrymandered themselves into a kind of superpower position where they're not used to having to listen to anybody else, and they're also not really used to a lot of people outside Tennessee paying attention to them. So suddenly they're on this big national stage, and what was interesting to me was that I felt like the Democrats in the House understood that. They understood, and they took advantage of it because they have spent several years now sort of not being able to talk in the legislature. But now, because of the nature of the hearing, where they had to give these, but each defendant essentially got 20 minutes to make a presentation, and then, were given all the time in the world to answer whatever questions they were asked. They had way more time to speak than they usually do in the House, and they got to do it on national TV. And also, again, I don't know if the Republicans thought about this as they proceeded down this path, but an X factor in here is that Justin Jones and Justin Pearson, as everybody who hadn't seen them speak before learned on Thursday, are really good public speakers.
Yes.
They're very good orators. Both of them, these young black politicians with activist backgrounds, drawing very much on kind of the rhetorical traditions of the civil rights movement, drawing on biblical references. Yes. I mean, the Democrats cited the Bible way more during the expulsion hearings than the Republicans did.
References to being Easter,
Well, and it's Maundy Thursday.
Maundy Thursday when they did it. Pearson, I believe, was talked about how that the expulsion was their version of the Saturday between Good Friday and Easter, but Sunday always comes, and we'll rise, we'll be resurrected.
Well, right. And so we'll get to the resurrection in a minute, because that metaphor is actually true. But what this did was it created this stage that suddenly the world was watching, and the Democrats kind of played to that. Whereas I felt like the Republicans were acting basically like they usually do, which is we can kind of act however we want without impunity because nobody's paying attention and nobody can do anything about it anyway. And there was a point in Jones's, and he was the first one to go, as you said, they kept asking him questions, and they were kind of trying to do like gotcha questions with him, but the reality is there wasn't a whole lot to gotcha with here because everybody had seen the thing happen in the first place. There was no secrets about it. They did show a video of it, but everybody had already seen it.
They were all there.
I mean, they tried to sort of like produce evidence of a conspiracy, like with suggesting that Gloria had smuggled in the megaphone or whatever. But really, there wasn't a lot that they could kind of gotcha them with, but they kept asking questions, and every time they asked Jones a question, he turned it into a soliloquy on the history of racism in Tennessee. And there was a point where I thought, just sort of politically, is there anybody in the Republican Party who's thinking maybe we should stop asking questions?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. Before last week, these, Jones and Pearson were relatively unknown, obscure freshmen.
Right. They've been in office for 3 months.
Freshman lawmakers, and now they're
in the super minority. By the way,
super minority. And now they're all of a sudden they're not only are they're kind of political stars, but they're also martyrs.
Yeah.
And all because of the actions that were taken against them. So
which, of course, the supermajority did not have to do in any way. They could have done any number of things. They could have reprimanded them. They could have, shown grace and kind of said, well, if you behave, you can stay and so forth. And, of course, the inescapable thing about this. Even going into it, the fact that 2 out of the 3 were these young black representatives who have not been shy in the limited amount of time they get to speak in the legislature about kind of challenging the status quo there. That optically definitely looked a little. You have a Republican caucus that's almost all white. I think they have one South Asian member.
Right.
And here they were targeting these 3 legislators, a woman and 2 black legislators. So kind of the optics of that, were not great to start with from the standpoint of, like, is Tennessee a bigoted state? Yeah. But then to take that and you expel the 2 black guys and you don't expel the white woman, like, as you say, there were some differences with Johnson's case versus the other 2. Yes, she didn't act quite the same. Like, and then I heard some speculation, like, oh well, maybe because she, does have some health issues. Maybe there was some sympathy for that. They didn't want to take away her health care. Like, whatever reasons you want to put behind that, it kind of doesn't matter because the optics of it are so strong and striking. You have a former Confederate state controlled by an almost all-white conservative legislature that spent years fighting against Justin Jones and other activists to keep a bust of the founder of the KKK, a brutal Confederate general and slave trader, in the House of Representatives. And they choose to expel the 2 black guys who have been fairly outspoken about racism in Tennessee. I mean, they're just there's not a good way to talk about that.
No, and Johnson pointed that out speaking to the media Thursday night when she said, hey, I'm a 60-year-old white woman, and they're two young black men. What do you think? Of course.
Well, and she, of course, has not been shy herself about calling out her colleagues for racism over time, and it's something that she's outspoken about too. And I do, you watch these things, and I saw a lot of people, liberals in Tennessee, which we do have liberals. They're gerrymandered into minimum power, but we do have them in the state. Saying they felt sad, heartbroken about what was going on in the state and so forth. But I also saw a lot of people feeling energized and feeling, a little bit of that kind of poke the bear thing, especially because the backdrop to all of this, and this was something that, Jones, Johnson, and Pearson were all consistent, and the other Democrats who spoke too, about keeping the focus not on the legislators, but that this was all about, they said, raising awareness of the need for gun regulation, gun reform. The backdrop to this is 3 dead 9-year-olds and 3 murdered teachers at a school just a few miles away from where the legislature was. And, it was sort of like the moral force of all of that was very rhetorically strong.
Yeah, and Democrats kept going back to that. They kept saying, you're talking about us breaking a rule. We're talking about, action that will save lives. And so they kept returning to that. Whereas Republicans really didn't really talk about the reason for their protests.
One thing that struck me was that the first part of the session, before they got to the expulsions, they were talking. They did take action on several bills having to do with school safety in various ways, some more directly connected than others. None of them having to do with guns, of course, but ways to provide better security to schools, to make sure doors are locked, these kinds of things. They did pass a package of bills around that, but those bills got completely lost.
Right.
So, I feel like the expulsion hearings for the Republicans ended up stepping on their own efforts that they were trying to make to say, no, we do take this seriously. We are trying to, protect our children and make these changes, because all of the focus became, to your average person, like if you say somebody got expelled from the legislature for bribery, for sexual harassment or whatever, most people would be like, oh, okay, like I get it. When you say, well, they the elected representative of the people of their district got kicked out because they went to the well of the house without being recognized. Most people are going to say, "What?"
Yeah, you know. And,
I don't even know what that means.
You know, another thing that kind of got lost a little bit, but Democrats did bring it up as well, was we'd mentioned earlier that Johnson and other Democrats get their microphones cut off. Johnson has to keep her hand raised for long periods of time before she's recognized, if she's recognized. Those kinds of things. That didn't happen in the voting session on the bills prior to the expulsion portion of the hearing. Democrats were able to speak. They were called on. They, you know, and
right, to that degree, the Republicans did seem aware that people were watching.
Yeah, and in fact, Sam McKenzie, who is a Knoxville Democrat, stood up and said, "Hey, you know, this isn't the way it normally is. You know, this is pretty unusual. They're doing this because they're being watched."
Right.
And you know so there was some awareness that there was increased scrutiny, apparently, but you know, once the of course now, at least temporarily, Pearson and Jones are silenced.
Sort of.
Temporarily.
Well, so, right. A couple of things about that. One is that legislators cannot raise funds while they are in session because, you know, for sort of obvious fears about corruption and so forth. As soon as Jones and Pearson were expelled, they were no longer legislators. Both of them and the Democratic Party immediately turned back on their fundraising mechanisms. And I think it was Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, who's a big Democratic Party, fundraiser. He said that they had raised $250,000 in 24 hours for the two of them. But then, as you say, their exile is likely to be very brief.
Yeah. Before we go to the exile, I was talking with Matt Shears, who's the head of the Democratic Party in Knox County, said that they raised $20,000 or something like that.
Just the Knox County Party?
Just in 2 days. And
to support Johnson, presumably?
Yeah, and they're having, they had a surge in volunteers, having a surge in people who are stepping forward to possibly run for legislative seats, in the future. And so it really... kind of one of the side benefits that accrued to the Democrats that I don't think the Republicans anticipated. But getting back to the exile, the funny thing about this is when there's a vacancy in the legislature, the legislative body in the home county of that legislator or that seat, they appoint a temporary replacement. Well, Pearson and Jones, being from Memphis and Nashville respectively, their commissions have a Democratic majority, and in fact, Nashville Metro Commission has already scheduled a meeting for Monday to appoint someone to fill the seat, and we can just guess who it's going to be. It's going to be Jones.
I mean, several Nashville council members have already come out and said that they will vote to reinstate him. I've seen others say, I will go with what the council members who live in that district want. But I think, and even Republicans on Thursday in conducting the expulsion, Speaker Cameron Sexton and others, acknowledge that, yes, they can come back, because the way that the statute's written having to do with expulsions is you can be expelled, but you can cut. There's nothing that stops you from coming. It's not a lifetime ban.
Right.
And so they could be appointed on an interim basis, but then there will have to be special elections in both of those as well. So presumably, if they both get reappointed and then both run again in the special elections, I mean, who knows? Maybe they'll get competition. All sorts of things can happen. But especially with the added sort of like, as you say, martyr status and also, frankly, kind of like rock star status within Democratic circles in the state now, it's a little hard to see both of them not getting reelected if that's what they want to do.
And it's kind of interesting that that they're the ones who got expelled, and they're going to most likely turn around and get right back in. This time, by Wednesday they'll be back in the House probably. I'm gonna,
right, depending on how long all that takes, but soon, certainly.
Soon, and but if Johnson had been expelled, the Knox County Commission has a Republican majority, a solid Republican majority.
9-2.
And the chances are they would have appointed someone other than Johnson to be the interim representative. Now, she would, I'm sure, would have run in the special election, and in that district, she won by 18 points in the last election. So odds are she would
pretty good chance.
She would prevail. But in the interim, we would have another Republican added to the supermajority.
Well, maybe
probably.
It's hard to say. I tried to feel out a couple of county commissioners about where people were leaning, if when it still seemed likely she was going to be expelled, and nobody wanted to say very much about it. I got the sense that for several commissioners, it felt like kind of a headache. That I think some of them are probably glad not to have to deal with it because they wouldn't be required to fill it. It would be up to them.
Yeah.
Because it would only be for like a 90 or 100-day period. It'd be a very short period of time. The legislature's about to go out of session within the next month. Probably you could have said, well, we'll just leave it open and then let the people of the district decide. But there certainly would have been pressure on that Republican majority to go ahead and name a Republican to that seat. There were, I know, at least a couple of Republicans whose names were being floated or who were floating their own names, kind of seeking that appointment prospectively. But that would have been a bit of a political sticky wicket for our county commission, because are you going to go and appoint a Republican to represent a district whose actual residents just elected a Democrat by 18 points? Is that really something that... Now, some people on county commission might have said, yeah, sure, we're fine with that. Others may have had reservations. But as it turned out, they don't have to make that decision. And I do think that there are probably several people on county commission who are perfectly happy to just stay out of it altogether.
Right. I think you're right. That's... especially after seeing kind of how things went down in the legislature.
Yeah. You can imagine
stay as far away from that as possible.
Imagine that county commission meeting where they're going to vote on a Republican there. I mean, you'd have a room packed. People would be yelling.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Honestly, it might have been a little bit fun from our standpoint, but I guess we've had enough fun this past week. So I don't know how much more there is to say about all this. I do think that this is a signal event. I think it has lasting repercussions, but we don't know what those are. Certainly we come out of it with an energized Democratic Party, and we, with a couple of newly minted media stars. I expect to start seeing Jones and Pearson in particular on various cable channels and, events and other places. And I think that also the issue of gun rights and regulations is not going to go away quietly this time. Of course, it's easy to make that, we're still only a couple of weeks out from that terrible shooting. We do have a tendency to be really concerned right after a shooting, and then but the surge that happened here felt a little different. The hundreds and hundreds of especially young people who came to the Capitol, who found out where the Capitol is, found out that this is a thing you can do. You can just cut out a class and go down and protest the legislature. it's hard to know what any of those impacts are. Certainly in the short term for the Republicans, it was a demonstration of raw power. But to me, it felt a little bit like one of those demonstrations of power that actually kind of ends up making you seem weaker at the end of it. Like sometimes the real strength is in not using it. Sometimes when you use your power too brazenly is when you invite pushback, when you invite fractures even within your own coalition. I certainly heard from a number of Republicans on Thursday who were not happy, who thought that this was a waste of time and a bad idea, and that the optics of it were terrible for the party, for the state. And so, I don't know. I don't know where any of it goes, but it was quite a day.
It was. It is so rare that Tennessee politics gets that much attention. The White House sent out a statement from President Biden. Barack Obama tweeted out a statement about it. I mean, this was...
And what was interesting? And
I'm going to interrupt right here, guys. It just came... Knox News is reporting that Kamala Harris is coming to Nashville and as a response to all this 15 minutes ago. Whatever time it is now, 1 o'clock on Friday afternoon.
There's, she wouldn't have been doing that a week ago, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and so now Tennessee is, it's not like it's in play in a political sense and like, Tennessee is going to become a swing state or anything like that. But Tennessee now can become a useful symbol, let's say, for proponents of democracy, for proponents of racial justice, and I don't think that any of that is what Speaker Sexton and the rest of the supermajority was trying to accomplish, but I do think it is what they've accomplished.
They certainly have achieved it, whether it was a goal or not.
I guess we should also mention the one other thing we were going to say about Justin Lafferty there, in addition to his name being raised having to do with the video, Justin Jones also actually filed a criminal complaint against Lafferty, not stemming from that day, but from a subsequent day this past week when there were also demonstrators at the legislature, and there was a moment when they were in recess where both Jones and Lafferty were on the floor of the House using their phones to take video of the gallery and so forth, and Jones published this video online where you see him, you can tell he's kind of standing close to Lafferty because he's kind of turning around and Lafferty is sort of like in the view at one point, and he comes back around to being, and he is close to Lafferty, but then you can't really see what happens on the video. There's clearly some kind of scuffle.
There's jostling.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And he ended up losing his phone. Supposedly, he says Lafferty pushed him and took his phone, and so he's actually pursuing assault.
Yes,
I think charges against Lafferty.
He filed an assault complaint with the Metro Nashville Police Department against Lafferty. So, and
Lafferty has said that he was just defending himself against that Jones was being threatening toward him, and he just kind of backed him up. Who knows what will come out of that? But that is another member of our Knox County delegation who has been entangled in all of this. Tennessee. What a state. It's funny to me, I've made this point on social media. I happen to live in a district where I'm simultaneously represented by Gloria Johnson, Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally, and Congressman Tim Burchett, all three of whom now have made national news in the last month in different ways. I didn't know that North Knoxville was sort of the political center of the universe, but... All right, let's talk about a couple of other things that did also happen this week. Also, Thursday night. Thursday was a long day for us here at Compass. The Knox County School Board had their monthly meeting, and they had a vote on a proposed charter school, which we have talked about before. Knoxville Preparatory School is a proposed all-boys academy that will educate grades 6 through 12. They want to open, at least to begin with, in the Boys and Girls Club building on Irwin Street in North Knoxville. Speaking of North Knoxville. And it's proposed by a group called Prep Public Schools, which also operates a very similar school in Chattanooga, Chattanooga Preparatory School, also an all-boys school. And they have been working on this application for a couple of years now. And the school system's own internal review team, which has to go through any charter school application, evaluated it and recommended approval of the charter school application. They said, yes, this meets all the state requirements. That made it seem very likely that the school would get approved, not least because the state also has a process laid out whereby even if a local board denies a charter, there are multiple levels of review and appeal, and the state can end up overruling a local decision. And so it kind of, given the local district's own recommendation, it seemed likely that this would pass. But, you know, politics, man. You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, nobody saw Johnson avoiding expulsion
by one vote
yesterday, and nobody saw this coming either, I don't think.
Right. Well, I mean, it became possible because there's 9 people on the school board. One of them was out of town. School board member Susan Horn, who is part of the 5-member Republican majority on the school board. As we have talked about, the school board is closely divided in a lot of ways. Well, 5 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and 2 independents. The 5 Republicans tend to vote together, at least on kind of any controversial issues. But Susan Horn was out of town. But it still seemed like this was discussed at the school board's work session on Monday, and from that discussion, it still felt like there were probably, 5 out of the other 8 who would vote to approve it. But that's not what happened. They actually ended up deadlocking 4-4, and the 4 members who opposed it, which were the 2 Democrats and the 2 independents, Reverend John Butler and Catherine Bike are the Democrats, and then Jennifer Owen and Daniel Watson are the independents. They all had individual concerns and reasons that they voted against it, specific to things that were in the application. Because one thing about the way state law is written, you can't deny a charter school application just because you don't like charter schools. If you think charter schools are a cancer that's eating away at the health of public schools, that's fine. That's your political opinion. That can't be a reason you turn down a charter school. Our state likes charter schools. Our state wants charter schools to succeed, and they don't want them voted down just because people don't like them. So to vote them down, you have to have reasons related specifically to their application and concerns you have about it. And so, they raised a bunch of them, some discrepancies about data having to do with what percentage of lower income students the Chattanooga school serves, about their suspension rates, questions about how much and how good a job the Knoxville prep team had done in building community support and doing community engagement. And so because of all of those 4 members voted against it. The 4 Republicans who were there voted for it and didn't really say a whole lot about it. And the 4-4 vote meant that it failed, because for anything to pass on the school board, you need 5 votes. It doesn't matter how many board members are present, you still have to have 5 votes. That's the law. It's not a majority unless you have 5 out of 9. And so it failed, but then the state law also requires something else, which is if you reject a charter, you have to say why. And you have to provide a list of reasons that then the applicant could go and try to fix, and they have 30 days to reapply and be reconsidered. That's required by the state. If you don't approve it, but you don't say why, that is, according to Deputy Law Director Gary Dupler, who was walking the school board through all of this on Thursday, that's equivalent legally to not taking action. You haven't taken a complete action. You've sort of neither approved nor denied it. And again, under state law, which as we said is favorable to charter schools, if a school board does not take any action on an application within 90 days, which in this case the deadline would be May 1st, it's considered automatically approved. So after it failed to pass, then they spent an hour trying to come up with reasons that they could get a 5-member majority to agree to say, here's the things we would like to have fixed. So the 4 who had voted against it presented all of their reasons and had individual votes on about 6 different reasons. And every one of those votes failed either 4-4 or 4-3. And so it was just deadlocked all the way through. And finally, they ran out of motions. They ran out of discussion. The issue just kind of ended unresolved. And I went up and talked to Board Chair Christie after the meeting, who is part of the Republican majority. Because one thing that had been said by Dupler during the meeting was that, well, the board could still call another special meeting before May 1st to vote on it again, with the assumption being that if Susan Horn were back, probably she would vote with the other Republicans, and you would have a 5-4 approval, and then they could kind of go on their merry way. But I think Christie was a little frustrated and worn out by the end of the meeting. It's been a long meeting. And she just said at that point, and of course this could change, but she said, I'm not inclined to call a special meeting. Yeah. She doesn't really see the need to call another meeting because she supported the application, and she knows that if they don't do anything else, per Dupler, it's just going to be automatically approved May 1st anyway. And so that may be the way it goes. Now, I don't know how thrilled the Knoxville prep people, they would probably rather have an affirmative vote than just this kind of de facto vote. But in any case, Brad Scott, the CEO of Prep Public Schools, who, by the way, told me he listens to the podcast. Hi, Brad, if you're listening.
Brad.
But he said that he wasn't totally sure what direction things were going to go, but that they are very committed to doing the school, and they're pretty confident that one way or another they will be able to get it approved and then kind of get underway, and their goal is to open in the fall of 2024. But, it was, among other things, a sign of really how divided that school board is. And if one person's missing, it can really change the whole dynamic.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's, and a lot of people don't realize that tie votes.
Tie vote's a failure.
Yeah.
You can't pass anything on a tie vote.
And so, but as you said, this law is set up to make it easier for charter schools to be established, regardless of the vote.
Yep.
in many ways. So,
all right, pedestrian bridge. We have a couple more things to hit on here, but we can do them pretty quickly.
Yeah, we can run through these real quickly. The pedestrian bridge from the south waterfront to the University of Tennessee campus. It's a $70 million estimated project. The city is applying for a $25 million grant from the federal government with a $6 million local match. Hasn't heard news on that one yet. But then last week, Governor Bill Lee presented his budget amendment. Every year later in the legislative process, the governor, whoever it is, the governor will basically put a supplemental budget out there for consideration. And $20 million is in the supplemental budget for the pedestrian bridge. The city had asked for $55 million, but the governor put in $20 million. That still leaves the project about $18 million short.
Assuming they get the federal money, which we don't even know yet.
Two assumptions. They get the federal money and the budget amendment is approved.
Right.
Which typically happens, but hey, if they're mad enough at Gloria Johnson, maybe
right.
it's,
well, it's not in her district.
Yes,
so.
That's true. But they would still be $18 million short. City says they're going to be looking at other sources of funding, maybe a redesign of the bridge to get the cost down if they can do that, those kinds of things. But it's really kind of too early to tell on that. And one other issue between the city and the legislature that kind of fell through the cracks this week almost was the bill that would force Knoxville to change how it does its elections for district council seats. That bill is sponsored it's already passed in the House, sponsored in the Senate by Frank Nicely of Strawberry Plains. He, at his request, they deferred action on it for another week. So we'll get to talk about that next week.
All right. Another just sort of interesting thing that happened, alarming thing in a lot of ways over the past week. This actually happened at the end of last week, but a lot of the discussion about it was this past week. There was a gas leak at Hardin Valley Academy, high school in West Knox County, and the initial report from this was that a janitor, a custodian who was part of this contract custodian group that we've talked about on here. The school system has been having trouble filling custodial positions, and so they contracted with local private company Duncan and Sons to provide custodians at about 15, 16 of their schools. One of those is Hardin Valley Academy. One of those custodians apparently deliberately, according to the police, he's been charged criminally with this, deliberately left gas valves in the school open, apparently because he was mad at his mother. That was what was in the
that'll show
legal
her.
documents. A little unclear, but he left it overnight, and so they come in the next day, and there's this funny smell of gas in the school. And over the course of a few hours in the morning, I guess people are reporting it and not feeling well and whatever. They ended up having to evacuate the whole school, shut it down for the day, do a bunch of remediation there. And so the first report that came out was that the janitor had been, of course, fired and arrested and criminally charged. But then this week, Superintendent John Ryswick first came out and said that he was ordering an internal investigation of the whole thing, including how did the local school administration respond once they realized that there was something going on. And then subsequent to that, he came out and announced that, in fact, the principal, or I guess at this point, almost former principal of Hardin Valley Academy, Rob Spees, was being placed on administrative leave with pay pending the investigation. And they appointed Mike Reynolds, who's a retired former administrator and principal, as the interim principal there. And what that sequence of events tells you, and this was also visible during public forum at the school board meeting Thursday, Hardin Valley parents not happy about this. No. It's very alarming. And a parent who spoke at the school board meeting Thursday night said that she was getting texts from her daughter in the school saying, I don't know, there's a gas leak, it smells funny, I'm not sure what's going on. And she was like, wait, what? What are you talking about? And she said, she was like, is the fire department there? And the daughter was like, no, nobody's here. And so this parent called her husband, who's a former firefighter, I think himself, and he knows like local firefighters. And she said, can you call the fire department and just ask if they know about this? And he called the fire department and said, do you guys know anything about a gas leak at Hardin Valley? And they were like, no, I don't think so, but we'll check it out. And, a few minutes later, like they're on their way there. And so that, the level and rapidity and appropriateness of response from the school administration to the incident, there were a lot of Hardin Valley parents who were really unhappy. One of the other parents who spoke Thursday night said basically, this was something that could have been a mass casualty incident.
Oh, yeah.
And she's right. A building full of gas, all sorts of people can get sick, it can catch on fire, it can explode. I mean, there's lots of bad possible results from having an open gas leak in a school building. So we'll see what happens there, what comes out of the investigation and so forth. But it did kind of put a spotlight back on this custodial contract that they have, and school board members had a lot of questions about how much, what kind of screening do they go through, and they were assured that, well, they go through the same screening and so forth as regular county staff. But for this to happen just 2 months into this custodial contract, I think there were a lot of people who had some misgivings about starting to contract out this custodial work, and I don't think this incident is going to give them a lot of good feelings about it. And one other thing we just wanted to mention here, we had a story about this week that you can find on our website, but the Knoxville Entrepreneur Center turned 10. It opened in 2013 on Market Square, where it is still based. And it has been operating for the past decade, supporting local businesses and would-be entrepreneurs in all sorts of ways. You and I are ourselves graduates of a Knoxville Entrepreneur Center program. Our failure to implement the recommendations that came out of that are not on them.
Not a reflection of them.
They are on us. Oops, I think I just tapped my microphone. Sorry if I fuzzed in anybody's ear there. Anyway, it's I was working for the city of Knoxville when the Entrepreneur Center opened. It's funny, I went to the 10-year celebration to take some photos, and former Mayor Madeline Rojero, my old boss, was there because she was the mayor who, really helped get it started. It has always had a high level. It gets funding from the city, from the Launch Tennessee program, and then from private donors. But the city has been a consistent supporter of it. And Mayor Rojero said that she had actually dug out her old talking points. This is how organized she is. She has very meticulously organized boxes of all her mayoral records, and she was able to go back and find her talking points from that day. And I was looking at that, and I thought, yeah, I think I wrote these 10 years ago. So for me personally, it was kind of cool to be there and see. I think it's. I was talking to Jim Biggs, the executive director, about this, that when it first started, a lot of us in the city were kind of like, well, it sounds kind of cool, but we're not really sure what it's supposed to do or be. And he said that was, in fact, the case, that it very much had to find its own. It was kind of a startup itself and had to figure out, who are we serving? What's our market? What do people want? But I think it's become, it is home to the Maker City initiative. It's home to the Let Her Speak initiative, which works with women entrepreneurs. It's home to the 100 Knoxville cohorts of Black-owned businesses. And so it's a small, but I think has become a valuable kind of part of, I guess, to use the dreaded word, our entrepreneurial ecosystem in Knoxville.
Yeah, I mean, if you are starting a small business, especially one that is kind of a niche business, it's a good resource for ideas, especially if you don't have a lot of business experience
or a lot of money, because most of their programs are free.
So if you don't have a lot of money, you were a liberal arts major instead of a business major, those kinds of things. It is a place to go to where you can get information and advice on from people who've been there and done that.
Yep.
So happy birthday!
Happy birthday, KEC, and yes, you can read about that on our website. All right, Seth, what do you think? Should we take a little break here, or should we plow straight on through?
You're the boss, buddy.
All right, let's take a little break. We'll come back and talk about it next week. Okay, looking ahead to this coming week, a couple things to watch in the legislature. As Scott just mentioned a few minutes ago, they're going to be talking about that bill on Knoxville city elections. There will also be an important committee vote on a school voucher bill that would bring school vouchers to Knox County, maybe as soon as this fall. So we will be watching both of those, plus anything else. The legislature is kind of in its final weeks, cranking through stuff that's been working their way through committees, and so we'll be monitoring that. And then this coming Thursday, the Knoxville-Knox County Planning Commission is meeting.
Planning Commission is meeting. Probably the one of the most contentious item that's on their agenda is a rezoning proposal for South High School. The former South High School. It is now a senior living apartment complex. The Helen Ross McNabb is wanting to buy it and put in a drug treatment residential drug treatment facility there. A couple of things. First of all, it's currently actually owned by the Industrial Development Board. It's because the developer of South High, Rick Dover, got a payment in lieu of tax agreement to help fund it. It is so if McNabb is successful and they do buy it, then the payments that the city and the county get the pilot go away.
Because they're a nonprofit.
They're a nonprofit, and they'll have other ways of not paying taxes.
Right.
Anyway, the and people in the neighborhood, the Woodlawn neighborhood over there, the Lindbergh Forest, are really concerned about it because it's right next to Dogwood Elementary School.
And it was kind of sold to the community as it was going to be senior housing, which is what it has been.
Yes, and so the people are very concerned as any time a drug treatment facility is proposed for any place, anywhere, neighbors are concerned about it, and they are with this one, with the proximity to Dogwood Elementary. There are a lot of people are really worried about it. Of course, they're also worried about the opioid crisis. So, so anyway, that's on the agenda. If it gets rezoned, then McNabb is going to go ahead and buy it, and it'll be converted at some point over to the drug treatment facility. However, the staff of Knoxville-Knox County Planning has recommended that it be denied. So, because it's not really compatible with everything else that's going on there. So, so we'll see how that works. That just because the staff has recommended denial doesn't mean that the commissioners will deny it. Just means that's their professional recommendation. There's one other kind of interesting proposal. There is someone who wants to put a campground in South Knoxville, right, basically the edge of Vestal, right behind Fort Dickerson Park. Just a stone's throw from it borders the area where Augusta Quarry is. But they're wanting to put in a 13 space primitive campground there, which is, it's the second campground that's come through. So it's kind of
the urban wilderness.
Yes, it is. So we'll see how that goes. I don't think that there's usually, I don't know if there'll be any opposition to that one or not, but certainly not to the level of the concern of the Lindbergh Forest folks.
All right. More action in South Knoxville. It's a hopping place. Well, we will be back next week to talk about those plus anything else. And these days, that means anything.
Anything is possible.
Who knows what's going to happen? As always, thanks to Seth Barber for his production work with Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by Will Wright. And we will talk to you next week. Hold on. Don't go away. I forgot to say happy anniversary to the Compass Points podcast.
Yes.
Seth just noted that this is actually our 52nd episode. Our first one was April 10th of 2022. I think there's 1 week where we didn't do one because it just didn't work out. But we've been doing this a year. So thanks to all of you for listening, and thanks again to Seth for putting it together for us.
Thank you guys. It's been a great time.
Yeah.
Talk to you later.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.